I was halfway through reeling in a base when I heard the familiar screech of golf cart tires on gravel. I didn't even need to turn around, I already knew who it was. "Excuse me. Excuse me, sir. That is not allowed," came the nasal bark of Olivia Tannen, head of the HOA and chronic ruiner of peace. I set my rod down and turned slowly. She was standing at the edge of the lake in her usual pastel pink visor and clipboard clutched like a holy text. Her badge, which she wore like a cop's, read, "President Lakewood Springs HOA. I'm Trevor Whitmore. I moved into this community 6 months ago to get some peace after retiring from my job as a fire investigator. Bought a cozy 2-story house that backed right up to the lake, no fence between my yard and the water. It was the reason I bought the place. You're violating Section 3(b)(7) of the HOA guidelines," Olivia said, jabbing a painted nail at me. "No recreational fishing without prior written approval and a certified HOA lake use wristband." I blinked. "A wristband? I'm 58, not 15 at a water park. Rules are rules," she snapped. "You'll be fined $200. Expect a notice within 48 hours, I laughed. "That lake's not even owned by the HOA, it's public." "Actually," she said, eyes gleaming like she'd been waiting all week for this, "we just signed an access agreement with the city council. As of this month, HOA use only, and that includes enforcement." I stared at her. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." She spun her golf cart around and peeled off like she just busted a meth lab. I reeled in my line, muttering under my breath. This was the 3rd fine she'd tried to hit me with in 2 months. Last month it was for not trimming my hedges to uniform height. Before that, she claimed my mailbox was unapproved brown. I didn't even get mad this time, I just got curious. Because here's the thing, I don't like being pushed around, and I really don't like fake authority. That night I dug into the county property records. Took me 2 hours and 3 cups of coffee, but I found what I was looking for. The lake, still owned by a private trust. The HOA had filed for an access agreement, but it hadn't been approved yet. Olivia had jumped the gun, and then I saw something strange. The trust was dissolving. The lake was about to go up for sale at the next county auction. I leaned back in my chair, grinning. Well, well. 2 weeks later, I sat in a mostly empty county office room, raising my paddle once. Nobody else bid. I bought the lake for $28,000. Cash. The clerk handed me the deed. "You're the new owner of Lake Waverly." I walked out of there whistling, already planning what I'd do next. First step, post new signs. Second step, lock the HOA out. And third, I was going to throw the loudest, most glorious fishing picnic this neighborhood had ever seen. The new signs went up on a crisp Saturday morning. They were aluminum, reflective, and drilled into sturdy wooden posts I'd sunk into the soil myself. One at each entrance path, one by the boathouse, and another right next to the HOA's little kiosk where they used to hand out those ridiculous wristbands. They read, "Private property, no trespassing, access by owner permission only, trespassers will be reported to county sheriff by noon." I had already caught 3 residents slowing their golf carts to a crawl, gawking at the signs like they'd spotted a sinkhole. I was sitting on a folding chair under a pop-up canopy I'd set up near the water's edge, sipping lemonade and flipping through the deed paperwork in a folder on my lap. Just for fun. The sun was out, the ducks were waddling along the shoreline, and I was exactly where I wanted to be. Then came the screech. Olivia's cart swerved up the path like a bat out of suburbia. She didn't even park, just jumped out and marched straight toward me in her designer flats, eyes locked on the sign next to the path. "What is this?" she demanded. I didn't answer right away. I turned the page in my folder. She yanked off her sunglasses. "I asked you a question." "This," I said, flipping to the county seal stamped on the 4th page, "is me enforcing property rights. You know, the kind that are recorded at the county clerk's office and not just dreamed up in a board meeting. You can't do this. The lake is for the community, not anymore." I held up the deed. "Bought it legally, full transfer of ownership. You can call the county office if you don't believe me." She grabbed the edge of the folder like she was about to rip it out of my hands. I shut it with a snap and stood. I'd advise against touching anything that doesn't belong to you, Olivia. Especially now that you're on someone else's land. She looked like she'd swallowed a mouthful of gravel. You're bluffing. Then why don't we let the county sheriff clarify it for you? I nodded toward the patrol SUV pulling up the access road. I'd invited Deputy Ramirez that morning. Figured I might need a witness. The deputy stepped out, sunglasses on, hand resting casually on his belt. "Morning, Mr. Whitmore. Everything all right?" Olivia whirled around. "Officer, this man is attempting to illegally block community access to a public resource." Ramirez didn't even blink. "Ma'am, I've reviewed the ownership documents. The lake is now private. You're currently trespassing." Her jaw dropped. "This is outrageous. You're free to contest it in court," Ramirez said. "But until then, I suggest you leave the property." She stood frozen for a second, then spun on her heel and stormed off, muttering something about legal action and emergency board meetings. I turned back to the deputy. "Thanks for backing me up." He gave a nod. "You handled it clean. Just watch your back, people like that don't let go easy." He wasn't wrong. By Tuesday, I received a certified letter alleging that my signs violated community aesthetic standards and demanded their removal within 72 hours or face a daily fine of $500. I didn't even open the envelope fully, just dropped it on my kitchen counter and called my lawyer, Dana Chen. She was a sharp, no-nonsense attorney I'd worked with back when I was investigating arsons. She specialized in land disputes now. "Forward me everything," she said. "I'll file an injunction against any fines, and I'll draft a cease and desist." She paused. "Did you want to press charges for harassment while we're at it?" I considered that. "Not yet. Let's see how deep this thing goes first." The next Friday, I threw the first picnic. 18 people showed up, neighbors who had grown tired of Olivia's petty enforcement and wanted a break from walking on eggshells. I grilled sausages, played blues guitar from a portable speaker, and let the kids fish off the dock. No wristbands, no clipboards. Just people enjoying a lake that finally felt like it belonged to someone human. By the following week, Olivia was panicking. She started sending out anonymous flyers printed on cheap paper, stuffed into mailboxes warning that unauthorized lake use might result in liability for injuries and voided property insurance. It was fear-mongering, plain and simple. I sent scanned copies to Dana. She called me 2 days later. "She's distributing fraudulent legal notices under the guise of the HOA. That's mail fraud if she used postal services. I'm contacting the county clerk and the state attorney general." I raised an eyebrow. "That's serious." "She's impersonating legal authority." "That's not a civil matter anymore." That weekend, I got a surprise knock on the door. It was Greg Hensley, one of the HOA board members. He looked uncomfortable, gripping his ball cap in both hands. "Trevor," he said, "I just wanted to say, not all of us are backing Olivia." I leaned on the door frame. "Is that so?" "She's been making decisions without votes, emergency rulings, no transparency. She even tried to allocate funds to sue you without board approval." I frowned. "That's misappropriation," he nodded. "I've been keeping records, memos, emails. I'd be willing to give them to your lawyer if it helps." "Why now?" He looked down. "Because I've lived here 15 years, and I'm tired of being embarrassed by the people supposedly representing us." I stepped aside. "Come in." We went through the documents together. Dana confirmed later that they showed multiple violations: misuse of funds, failure to hold proper meetings, and even forged board member signatures on some approvals. By mid-month, we filed a formal complaint with the state HOA Regulatory Council and the county district attorney's office. Olivia was about to face more than just angry neighbors, but before that storm broke, I had another idea: a second lake party. Bigger, publicized. Flyers delivered personally to every house by me, not anonymously. I called it the Freedom Fish Fry. No HOA permission needed because it was held entirely on my land. 76 people came. I borrowed a bounce house for the kids, rented a sound system, and even brought in a local barbecue truck. People danced, laughed, and talked openly about everything they were sick of: the fines, the threats, the power trips. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a community. Then Olivia showed up again. This time, she wasn't alone. She had a man with her, a stiff-looking guy in a blazer carrying a briefcase. She marched toward me, waving a thick envelope. "Cease and desist," she declared, "for unauthorized gathering and disruption of community peace." I took the envelope without touching it. "You're serving me a cease and desist at a private event on land you don't control." The man looked uncomfortable. "Actually, I was told this was a shared space under HOA jurisdiction." "It's not. You were lied to," he hesitated. "May I see the property deed?" I handed him a laminated copy. He scanned it, then looked at Olivia. "You didn't mention this was privately owned." She turned red. "It's adjacent to community space. That affects the whole neighborhood." "That doesn't change the property lines," he said flatly. He handed the envelope back to her. "I won't be involved." And just like that, he walked away, leaving Olivia standing in the middle of a crowd of neighbors who had all stopped to watch. Someone clapped, then another. Within seconds, she was surrounded by polite, sarcastic applause. Someone handed her a paper plate of ribs. She slapped it away and stormed off, cheeks burning. It was the last time she showed her face at the lake, but the fallout was just beginning, and I had more than enough rope to pull the rest of her mess into the daylight. 2 weeks after the Freedom Fish Fry, the HOA meeting was packed to the walls. Usually, these things drew a dozen retirees and a plate of stale cookies. That night, nearly 100 residents showed up, some standing in the back, others sitting cross-legged on the floor of the community rec center. The mood was tense but electric, like everyone had finally realized they'd been grinding their teeth for years, and now had someone to stand behind. Olivia sat at the front table, flanked by the remaining board members, her lips pressed into a thin line. She hadn't sent out the usual email announcement. Greg had. He'd also included an updated agenda with one item in bold: motion to remove board president. I showed up 15 minutes early and sat in the second row, directly in her line of sight. She didn't acknowledge me, but she kept glancing at the man sitting beside me, Dana's private investigator, Marcus. He wore a plain gray suit and held a brown leather portfolio on his lap. He wasn't there to intimidate. He was there because we'd uncovered something far worse than power-tripping fines or forged board approvals. When Greg opened the meeting, Olivia tried to push through the usual formalities. But the crowd wasn't having it. "We're skipping the minutes," someone shouted from the back. "We're here to vote." Olivia's voice cracked. "We haven't verified quorum." Marcus stood and spoke calmly. 74 property owners are present. That exceeds quorum by over 50%. I counted myself. She opened her mouth, then shut it again. Greg cleared his throat. "Before we vote, there's something you all need to see." He gestured to Marcus, who stepped forward and placed a stack of documents on the front table. Then he pulled out a small projector and clicked a remote. A photo appeared on the wall behind the board. It showed Olivia standing in front of the old boathouse, except the date in the corner was from 4 months ago, long before any supposed access agreement with the city had even been submitted. "This is a still from a motion-triggered camera Mr. Whitmore installed on his property," Marcus explained. "It records anyone approaching the lake from the eastern path. Here's another." The next slide showed Olivia and one of her board allies, Denise, accepting an envelope from a man in a suit. They weren't aware of the camera. The timestamp put it on the same day the HOA had claimed to have held an emergency vote to restrict lake access. "That man," Marcus continued, "is Harold Finnegan. He runs a surveying firm that's been under state investigation for falsifying easement paperwork in 2 nearby counties. We pulled the original access request that was filed with the city. It was never approved, but a copy used by the HOA had a different signature and a falsified timestamp." A woman in the audience gasped. Someone else muttered, "That's a felony." Dana had warned me this might be coming. Olivia hadn't just pushed limits, she'd stepped directly into criminal territory. The fraudulent document had been used to levy fines, threaten residents, and submit expense reports. That made it wire fraud, forgery, and potential embezzlement. Olivia stood abruptly. This is a smear campaign. None of this has been proven. Marcus didn't blink. Actually, it has. The city clerk's office confirmed the only legitimate version of the access request. The sheriff's office has opened a formal investigation. You should expect a subpoena within the week. The room exploded with murmurs. Olivia looked around, searching for anyone still in her corner. No one met her eye. Greg stood. Motion to remove Olivia Tannen as HOA board president, effective immediately. The vote wasn't even close. When it was over, she walked out without a word. The next morning, a city patrol car was parked in front of her house. By the end of the week, all board members with ties to her were either voted out or resigned. Greg was appointed interim president, and he immediately froze all discretionary spending and called for a full audit. I didn't attend the next meeting. I was too busy installing solar lanterns along the lake paths. With the HOA's grip broken, the neighborhood had started to breathe again. Kids rode bikes without being chased off for unauthorized wheel traffic. A group of veterans formed a weekend cleanup crew without having to file a committee request. People started waving to each other again. One afternoon, while I was replacing a cracked dock board, Greg walked down with a cooler. He handed me a cold bottle of root beer and sat beside me. "You know," he said, "I think the lake did more than just drown her authority. It gave folks a reason to look up from their lawns." I nodded. "It gave them the chance to remember they live next to people, not rules," he chuckled. "You ever think of joining the board?" I snorted. "I've already got enough on my plate keeping this water clear and the fish biting. Fair enough. But if you change your mind, I'd vote for you." He left me with that, heading back up the path toward the main road. That weekend, I hosted a bonfire by the water. No flyers this time, no announcements, just word of mouth. And yet, more than 50 people showed up. Someone brought a guitar. Someone else brought marshmallows. The kids ran barefoot through the grass, and the adults sat in folding chairs sharing stories they hadn't told in years. As the firelight flickered on the lake's surface, I realized something. This wasn't just about pushing back. It was about reclaiming something that had been stolen slowly, through silence and fear and clipped hedges. And now it was ours again. The first sign that this was bigger than just a power trip came 3 days after Olivia vanished from the neighborhood. A man in a navy suit knocked on my door just after sunrise. Tall, clean-cut, sharp eyes. He introduced himself as Special Agent Dorsey from the State Department of Regulatory Compliance and set his credentials on my kitchen counter without being asked. He didn't sit. Just looked around the room like he was cataloging exits. "I'm here because of a whistleblower packet submitted by your legal counsel." "You're the resident who purchased Lake Waverly?" I nodded, setting down the mug of coffee I'd been nursing. "That's me." He pulled a tablet from his satchel and began scrolling. "We've identified at least 4 forged documents tied to your HOA's filing history. 2 include city permit applications with altered timestamps. 1 includes a falsified environmental compliance review. And the last appears to be a forged grant request submitted under the name of a local nonprofit that doesn't exist." That last one caught me off guard. "A fake charity," he tapped the screen, "filed 6 months ago. Claimed to be collecting funds to install eco-friendly lighting and preserve communal shoreline integrity. Supposedly sponsored by the HOA and operated by a board-appointed subcommittee. The grant was approved for $11,000, never used for lighting." "That money's gone." I leaned back slowly. "Gone where?" He glanced up. "That's what we're trying to find out." I told him everything I knew, what we'd uncovered, what the neighborhood had witnessed, the records Greg had turned over. He listened silently, occasionally typing notes. When I mentioned the surveillance footage, he asked for copies without hesitation. "I'll need you to testify," he said quietly as he packed up. There's going to be a joint investigation. State auditors, county sheriff's office, and possibly the attorney general's office. If the evidence holds, this isn't just HOA misconduct. It's fraud, misuse of public funds, and possibly laundering. He paused at the door. You didn't just buy a lake, you stepped into a nest. By the end of the week, 2 board members had been served subpoenas. Denise, the woman photographed with Olivia near the boathouse, was arrested for obstruction after she refused to turn over HOA financial records stored on a password-locked laptop. Her husband tried to claim it was his personal property. The court ordered a forensic review. Greg and I were both called in to provide sworn statements. Dana came with me. We sat in a windowless municipal office with a state investigator named Rivas, who looked like she hadn't slept in a week. She was precise, methodical, and had already pulled every HOA bank transaction from the past year. There's a pattern, she explained. Funds were shifted through a series of beautification projects that never happened, landscaping invoices from non-existent companies, equipment rentals with no receipts. We even found a $10,000 consulting fee paid to a shell company in Nevada. Greg leaned forward. Who was the signatory? Rivas didn't look up. Olivia Tannen. Every time. When word got out that the investigation had gone criminal, the community turned from cautious to furious. People who'd once stayed silent at meetings now showed up with folders, screenshots, and notarized letters. One elderly couple brought in a stack of fines. They'd paid over the last 2 years more than $8,000 in total for things like inconsistent mulch shading and non-compliant patio seating. None of those violations had any legal basis. They were made-up codes, written by Olivia and rubber stamped by her loyalists. And the money had disappeared. The sheriff's office raided the HOA's rented storage unit the same week. Inside, they found dozens of unopened letters from residents, including appeals, complaints, and refund requests. There were also boxes of branded wristbands, over 1,000 of them, still in plastic wrap. But the worst discovery came from a flash drive hidden in a binder labeled Q4 Maintenance, a spreadsheet with detailed notes on targeted residents. It listed names, addresses, compliance risk scores, and recommended ways to pressure them into selling. One column was labeled Fence Line Leverage. Another said Violation Potential High/Medium/Low. I recognized 5 names on the list. One of them was mine. That spreadsheet changed everything. What had started as petty fines and overreach was now a case of systematic intimidation and financial abuse. The state prosecutor filed charges within 72 hours of the discovery: conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, tampering with evidence, mail fraud, and criminal harassment. Olivia was arrested in a grocery store parking lot on a quiet Thursday morning. She didn't resist. She didn't say a word. Just stared straight ahead as the officers cuffed her and loaded her into the back of the cruiser. Her house went dark the next day. A for sale sign appeared within the week. With the old board dismantled and the audit complete, the county appointed an external administrator to temporarily oversee HOA operations. Greg declined the permanent role, saying he wanted to focus on restoring the community, not running it. The fines were reversed, refunds began processing, and the community held its first real vote in years to elect a new board from the ground up. I was approached about running. Again, this time I accepted. I didn't want the title, but I wanted to make sure this never happened again. I spent 20 years digging through ashes looking for truth. I figured I could handle a few budgets and bylaws. We rewrote the HOA charter from scratch: public meetings only, no anonymous fines, mandatory vote verification, and a strict financial transparency clause. Every dollar spent had to be published in a monthly report. We even passed a rule banning the use of personal surveillance footage by the board unless approved by a community vote, because no one should feel watched in their own yard again. As for the lake, I kept it private, not out of spite, but because it had become something more than a body of water. It was where neighbors gathered without fear, where kids learned how to fish without getting sighted, where stories were exchanged and trust rebuilt. I hosted seasonal events, spring bird-watching mornings, summer night concerts, fall canoe races. All free, all open to the community, no forms or wristbands or clipboard patrols. And every year, on the anniversary of the first picnic, we held what the neighborhood came to call the Real Justice BBQ. It was a celebration, a reminder, and a thank you. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees and the lake reflected the orange sky like glass, an elderly man I didn't know well wandered over to me with a plate of cornbread and ribs. He nodded toward the water. "You know, I used to think this place was cursed, too many rules. Never felt like home." I took the plate and handed him a lemonade. "What changed?" he smiled. "You made it ours." He walked off without another word, joining a group playing horseshoes by the dock. I stood there for a while, watching the lake ripple in the breeze. The same lake that had started it all. It had taken lies, legal fights, and one hell of a paper trail to get here. But standing there, surrounded by laughter, music, and the smell of grilled corn, I knew one thing with complete certainty. This was no longer their lake, it was ours. And no one was ever taking it back.